Well, we're continuing on in our study through Genesis, and I'm really excited about this message and next week's message because it's kind of a twofer, 2 parts, and you'll start to understand why. But this week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Joseph. We're going to talk about Joseph. And last week, we learned about Jacob, and Jacob is Joseph's dad. Jacob later God called him Israel. If I mess up and I call him Jacob this week, save the email. You know who I'm talking about. So Jacob and Israel, same person. And we're talking about one of his sons, Joseph. Now today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about something more important than just character. You see, Joseph had character. He was a man of character. But we're talking about something more than character. Today, what we're going to talk about is integrity and faith. You see, those are not the same things as character. And what I mean by that is you can have character, you can be a moral person, and still die and go to hell. Maybe I shouldn't open with that. But it's the truth. Integrity is something just a little different because integrity is rooted in faith. It's foundational. You see, faith isn't just that we believe. Faith is that we trust. And I think some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. We say we believe a lot of things, but when the scubulon hits the fan, where's our trust? Now, when we think about faith, what we tend to think about is like this spiritual thing inside of us that's moving, hopefully growing, maybe not. But faith is supposed to be that we trust that God is who he says he is and that he will always do what he says he will do, both the good and the bad. Now, integrity. Integrity is when our actions, right, when our stated beliefs are in line, when they mesh. You see, integrity comes from the root word integer, which means one. One. In other words, the things that I do and the things I say match up with the things that I say I believe. It's one. So integrity simply means that we don't live 2 different lives. 2 different kinds of lives. In fact, Christians, we are taught by the gospel that we don't do good things so that we can have a relationship with Jesus. Because that it's that we have a relationship with Jesus that opens the door. That relationship in which we are saved sets us free to do good things. We do good things because of the relationship, not to get the relationship. And so, if you lack integrity, the truth is it could just reveal that regardless of what we say and what we believe, if the way we live looks like Jesus isn't the Lord of our life, then the reality could be that we really don't have faith. And that's something that it's okay to talk about because you can't get somewhere unless you talk about it and unless you're honest about it. And now as we look at Joseph and we primarily talk about integrity, we also, I think, need to flush out of our minds, especially those of you that grew up in church. I don't have that baggage. Those of you that grew up in church, what we need to do is kind of push away Sunday school, push away VBS, and get this idea out of our minds that Joseph is some sort of superhero or that this is just a simple story for kids. Neither of those things is true. Joseph is a real man. He has real problems. He has real issues and real feelings, just like you and I. He's real. And some of the same areas that challenged Joseph, it challenged his integrity, I think many of us struggle with today. Now, there are 4 primary areas that we're going to cover this week, and we're going to cover the last one next week. And I'm telling you, if you've got any other plans, cancel them. Be here next week. I think the needle moves for some people next week if you track with what's going on this week. And so, spoiler alert, with what we're going to cover next week is that he has to forgive his family members. He has to forgive his family members. And so today what we're going to do is we're talking about Joseph. We're talking about him finding himself in these situations where his faith, where his integrity is tested. And the first way it is tested is the approval of people. And I think that resonates so much in social medias today. I feel absolutely fortunate, blessed, mildly Amish, I suppose. I don't have social media, but there are people that share, like, this is what it looks like, this is what people are posting. And it's a lot of people trying to lead fake lives, trying to cut and paste and crop and chop out the things that they don't think, or we got to retake that picture because it's not perfect. Friends, that's fake. It's just looking for the approval of others, and that's wrong. The second that he is going to be tested in his integrity and his faith is sexual temptation, and I mean nothing. Hear me, church. Nothing will test your faith like sexual temptation. This is real, and he's a real person. You see, that's when people essentially say, outwardly, like, I love Jesus, but this area of my life, I'm going to do what I want to do. And it's essentially making you the Lord of your life. And so the third that he's going to be tested with is power. The easy way to define that is trying to make way too much of you. Me trying to make way too much of me. I see that and I hear that in so many people, especially younger generations. I'm not picking on you. But I pray for you, especially when I hear you talking about how awesome you are, how you're the best at that, the master of this. Brothers and sisters, we are not supposed to think like that, let alone. Back up, that is awesome. We'll just keep it on standby. This is powerful stuff we're talking about. And so before we start, I want to recap just a little bit in chapter 35. And what we're going to find out is that Joseph's brothers did not like him at all. They didn't like him at all. And what we're going to see is part of it is his fault, knowing when to shut up. Part of it is his dad's fault, Jacob or Israel. But honestly, I think we could say part of it is God's fault. Part of it is God's fault. And here's why. You see, Jacob, or Israel, the dad, had a bunch of kids. He had a bunch of kids, but Joseph was his favorite. Now, here's the problem. He not only told Joseph, he told all the rest. And so here's a tip. If you've got kids, you got multiple kids, and you have a favorite, don't tell them, because apparently it can lead to problems of biblical proportions. But he loved his dad so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. He loved his son so much. He actually makes him this really tricked out, beautiful, multicolored coat. He's got this coat for him. And so it gets rubbed in the faces of his brothers. And Joseph, essentially, he walks around and he's wearing his dad's favorite coat all the time. And so they hated him for that. But we also learn that his brothers, all of his brothers, are basically shepherds. They're shepherds except for Joseph. And so what Jacob, what Israel, his dad would do is he would send Joseph to go check on his brothers, essentially come back and tattle on them. He would come back and bring a report about what the brothers were doing. And instead of lying for his slacker brothers, he told the truth every single time. He told the truth every single time. You see, for Joseph, he was more concerned about what was doing right and being honest than he was concerned about making his brothers happy. And so they don't like him. And then we pick up in Genesis 37, verse 5. We pick up in Genesis 37, verse 5. And this says, then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And here was his dream. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. There we were, all of us, binding sheaths of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheath stood up, and your sheaths gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. And are you really going to reign over us? His brothers asked him. Are you really going to rule us? And so they hated him. They hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. In other words, brother, why'd you even have to say it out loud? Why'd you even have to say that? This is why we don't like you. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. Look, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and even the stars were bowing down to me. So are you tracking with this picture? Joseph doesn't know when to stay quiet, and he's putting all this out there for his brothers. They're getting angrier and angrier, and apparently they're getting up in the morning, they're gathering around some Cocoa Puffs, and he says to all his brothers, he says, check this out, I had 2 amazing dreams. So not only does Dad think I'm awesome, but apparently God does too. I'm just saying. Can you pass me the milk? He doesn't understand the social etiquette. And now what I'm going to say is, I do not think Joseph handled this the best. But from this point forward, he aims his whole life at the vision that God gave him. And so Joseph had faith, and he believed, and he trusted God. And the reason that Joseph is this man of integrity is he lines up all of his actions. What Joseph does from this point forward is he lines up all of his decisions, his choices, everything around him. He lines that up to the truth of God. What he says and what he does is matching up with what he believes. That's integrity. And so if we pick it up in verse 14, Joseph's given this bad report on his brothers. He tattled on them, and he shared God's vision that he gave him. And then here's the response in verse 14. Israel, or Jacob, says, go and see your brothers and the flocks they're doing, or how they're doing, and bring back a word to me. He sent him from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there, wandering in the field, and asked him, what are you looking for? Joseph says, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks? They've moved on from here, the man said. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph set out after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan, and they saw him in a distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, oh, look, here comes Mr. Dad's favorite. Here comes that dream expert. So now, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. And when Reuben heard this, one of the brothers, he tried to save him from them, and he says, let's not take his life. Reuben also says, don't shed blood. Throw him into the pits of the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from them and return him to his father. And scholars maintain this is why they named a sandwich after Reuben. So, true story. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long-sleeved robe he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit, and the pit was empty without water. And so let me kind of blow up the prosperity message that is taught in far too many churches today. Friends, many times when we follow God, when we follow Jesus, when we follow the Holy Spirit, i.e., when we do the right thing, it can still end badly. It can still end badly. Joseph isn't doing the right things so God will hook him up. Joseph was doing the right things over and over and over, and we are going to read this over and over because he has faith in God. And so Joseph, he's doing the right things. He's doing what his dad told him to do, and it does not go well for him. But friends, it gets worse. He did the right thing, and yet it gets worse. You see, there's this group of Ishmaelites that come along, and the brothers actually sell him into slavery. They put him into human trafficking. And so Joseph, this man of great faith and this man of integrity, he does the right thing, and yet he is still beaten, he is still battered, he is still bruised and sold into slavery. So what about you? What about you? How important is the applause of people to you? Think about this. what would it look like that if for the next 7 days, if you, me, all of us, for 7 days, if we were full of faith, for just 7 days, if you and I could trust God no matter what, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstance, if you and I, that our faith and our trust actually embodied, resembled, exuded what we say we believe, what would it look like? What would your week look like? Put this in the context of you. What would your week look like if every one of your decisions, every one of your actions lined up with what you say you believe? What if the next time that you're with your friends, you simply, for 7 days, said and did what actually lined up with what you say you believe? Me too. Me too. Friends, what if for the next 7 days, what if you just simply treated one another, spoke to one another, valued one another the way God says we're supposed to? We say we believe God. What if for the next 7 days you weren't snarky? What if for the next 7 days you weren't selfish? What if for the next 7 days we actually allowed the Bible to permeate our lives, and we actually treated people with honor and value, and we engaged in submission competitions where we didn't have to win? We didn't have to be the victor in the argument, in the situation, in picking where you're going to go to eat, whatever it is. What if for the next 7 days we let our faith rule our lives? Every time that I get up here, every time that I have to sit and prep, every time I have to toss and turn about what I'm going to speak on, preach on, teach on, every time I have to ask myself, what am I more concerned with? Am I going to put together something that is more concerned with your opinion or your feelings? What you'll think of me, or whether you'll stay, go, serve, give? What am I going to let that rule exactly what I'm allowed to teach or preach? Or do I allow God to, do I allow myself to have the obedience to say what God wants to say to you? Do you see the difference? I have to ask myself every single week, not just before sermons, before every group that I lead, every discipleship and counseling and mentoring time that I spend with people. Every single time I have to ask myself things like Galatians 1, chapter 1, verse 10. For am I now trying to persuade people or God? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of God. So, friends, what about you? The applause of people, the temptations you face, the power that you would like. Is that more important than integrity? If you say that you believe in Jesus, if you say that he is your Lord and he is your Savior, that you're going to heaven, then this week, try it out. This week, what will be more important? And again, is it going to be the popularity with your peers? To hang out? Drop it like it's hot? Is that awkward hearing your pastor say that? It's as long as I don't do it. That's just, these knees, not going to happen. Just going to tell you. Anyway. Or is this week, is the approval of God just going to rank a little higher than it has been? Me too. Me too. And so if we go back to Genesis, So what does Joseph do? Joseph does what any one of us would really do if we have faith and integrity. And it still doesn't go well for him. He's beaten, he's thrown in a pit, he's sold into slavery, he's literally shipped off and put on an auction block in Egypt. And then this powerful guy named Potiphar comes and he purchases Joseph as a slave. All for doing the right thing. And so if we jump forward to chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt, and an Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh and captain of the guards, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there, and the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And I'm just saying, like, time out. If we're going to be real about what we're processing, not just in our hearts, but in our minds, if we're going to be honest, then I don't know if you're just better than me, but I'm thinking, no, he wasn't. The Lord was with, he just got sold into slavery. No, he wasn't. God couldn't have been there with him. I mean, if God is good, how can he let Joseph end up in this human trafficking situation? And what's wild is even though I have these flawed questions and frustrations, we never see Joseph questioning God. Ever. You know why? Because Joseph was a man full of integrity and a man full of faith. A man full of integrity and a man full of faith. Verse 2 says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under Joseph's authority. And from the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. And I got to be real with you. Once again, I'm finding myself, if I'm Joseph, I'm saying, time out, God. You're blessing the Egyptian's household? For my sake? How about doing me a solid? I got an idea. How about bless me for my sake? Because I don't think I'm being blessed right now. But Joseph did what any one of us would do if we were full of faith and full of integrity. You see, Joseph just understood that God is in control. And he trusts God. He trusts God. And so verse 5, the Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, if this is a movie, this is one of those moments we talk about where the music changes, like dun, dun, dun. Like next verse, it says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. Let's say, this isn't going to go well. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, sleep with me. She was subtle. But he refused. He refused. Look, he said to his master's wife, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. In other words, he trusts me because I'm a man of integrity, a man of faith. And saying yes to that would exclude me from being a man of integrity and a man of faith. He says he trusts me. He trusts me. He doesn't concern himself with anything, and he's put all that he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except for you, because you are his wife. And so Joseph's life is seemingly going in this better direction, and now this married chick is putting the moves on him. This is not a good thing. You see, nothing tests our integrity more than sexual temptation. Nothing. And what Joseph, what does he do? He tells her no, and he talks logic. He says logically, no, and this is why. This is who I am. This is the trust that I've earned. But here's the truth. Here's the truth. For most of us, logic has very little power over sexual temptation. Far too many people have done some just sucky things in their relationships. And even if you ask them, it made no sense to them on paper. They've got so much to lose and barely nothing to gain, and yet they still do it. Logic has very little power when it comes to sexual temptation. So do not try to logic your way out of it. You try to faith your way out of it. You put your integrity in front of it. Because I'm telling you that sexual temptation is just different. It's just different. And so here's what Joseph says and what he does. In verse 9, he says, how could I do this immense evil? He doesn't church it up. He doesn't say just, how could I do this thing? He puts the power of the nastiness on it, and he calls it this immense evil. How could I sin against God? When you're facing temptation, when's the last time you said, how could I sin against God? Or did you dilute it down and just say, well, how could I do this thing? Do you understand the difference? Friends, there are certain things that we should take power from, and there are other things that we need to put a label on it. That's the way to fight better. How could I do this immense evil? How could I sin against God? Although she spoke to Joseph the day after day, in other words, she was prepping him. This was, hey, you're so funny. You're so strong, Hercules. Yes, look at you in the little tunic there. Yeah, how about we go to lunch? She spoke day after day. He refused to go to bed with her. So this means Joseph put up guardrails to keep him from getting too close to falling off the edge and doing this immense evil, this really bad thing. If she was speaking day after day, that means day after day he was putting up boundaries. Day after day he was reminding himself that this was evil. Day after day he did not allow her to soften up his integrity. When we say, you remember how often have we talked about this? How we just have this propensity to just kind of step up to the line. I'm not following. I'm not going over the line though. Day after day, he didn't allow himself to get up to that line. He didn't allow himself to do this immense evil. Brothers and sisters, so many flirt with sexual temptations when what they need to be doing is running. They need to be fleeing. If we're going to go biblical, you're supposed to flee. We think we got this, but we don't got this. In fact, during the fall, I promise you, you're not going to feel any pain at all until the sudden stop. When you're done falling. You see, that sudden stop changes everything. That sudden stop brings in the guilt, brings in the shame, brings in the stain. That sudden stop makes you feel like you've been disqualified forever. And so if logically none of us want to fail in these areas of sexual immorality, the question simply becomes, then why do we? If we all know it's a bad thing, why do we? Why is it such a struggle if we actually believe that we should live a life God's way and that we love Jesus? Why is it such a problem? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are a few reasons. Number one, we are impatient. We're impatient. Our appetites will always tell us that now is better than later. Now is better than later. And I don't care what you put that in. Put in sexual temptation. Put that last thing that you knew you couldn't afford and you couldn't wait. Our appetites always say now is better than later. And we'll church it up, won't we? Well, I'm gonna beat the interest rate, or I'm gonna do this and that. We church it up. Now is better than later. Number two, none of us would say this out loud, but it's what we say with our actions. Our way is better than God's way. We don't admit that, but that's exactly how we live. And so basically, logic kind of evaporates, it disintegrates, and we basically think, okay, God, I know that you're the almighty maker of heaven and earth. You knit me in my mother's womb, and you know my thoughts before I even think them. But other than that, who do you think you are? We wouldn't say it that way, but that's the way we live. Or number 3, we understand what God says. We do. But we somehow create this illusion in our mind that that's a great precept for children, or really most other people. But my situation is unique. My situation is different. What we do is we rationalize, or we tell ourselves rational lies. Friends, we do that. Me too. But the truth is, you're either married or you're not. Oh, but I love her in my heart. No, love is not a verb. Did you know that? Love is about providing, it's about protecting, it's about serving, it's about committing, it's about respecting. Husbands and wives, we don't leave out this respecting. Do you talk to the one you love respectfully? Oopsie. You can say ouch or amen, I don't care. And so, whether we say I'm impatient, or my way is better, or I rationalize it, it really comes down to a lordship issue. Either Jesus is Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. And so let me ask, once again, what about you? Am I just talking to myself? Let me ask you, do you trust him in that way? Do you trust him? Here, an easy one. Do you trust him with your sex life? Do you really? Because he says some very clear things about it. And again, this isn't just the non-married and what they should be patient for, but this is also how married people should treat this. He says he has a lot to say about it. And so why, when reading through this, why is it so important to flee that temptation? It's because of what hangs in the balance. It's because of what hangs in the balance. Paul, I think, says it this way in, 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, the second part. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but a person who is sexually immoral sins against his own body, hurts themselves, and they don't know it because they think they're just feeling pleasure. Friends, that says sexual sin is in a category all by itself. Proverbs, if we go to Proverbs chapter 6, verse 26, for a prostitute's fee is only a loaf of bread, but the wife of another man goes after a precious life. Can a man embrace fire with his clothes and not be burned? Can a man walk on burning coals without scorching his feet? So it is with the one who sleeps with another man's wife. Do I have to say that again? So it is with a man who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Punishment. Now there's an interesting thing for a believer, isn't it? We love to talk about the love. But we don't ever want to think about why we might be punished or feel punished. Do you know what this means? What this means is that you're standing on the edge of a cliff with no safety harness whatsoever. It's just a slip and a fall. And when you slip and when you fall, part of you dies. It does. You see, friends, when we fall to things like sexual temptation, the truth is something dies. My bride and I, and it's my fault. I was the non-believer. My bride and I, we absolutely did things we shouldn't have before we should have. And though I say worship, I only worship God. Though I love the ground my bride walks on. And I constantly strive to be a better husband, the godly husband, by the way, that she deserves. There are areas of our relationship that we can't get back. We can embrace everything that God has given us and that he continues to give us, but we made poor choices that you can't turn around. So parents, if you've got young people, and if I ever hear you say, well, I can't tell them something because I'd be a hypocrite because I messed up, shame on you. We have a chance to live into young people so that they don't have the baggage that we have. We need to take that more seriously. You have every right to say that you shouldn't do that, and here's why. It doesn't matter if you've messed up. But maybe I'm the only one who cares about that. Something dies. Something dies when we make those bad choices, whether it's our innocence, whether it's our purity. For some of us, it's the death of a relationship. For some, it's been the death of a marriage. For some, it's been the death of your job. But I'm telling you, something dies. So much hangs in the balance in this command of God to flee, not flirt. God says, run away, turn and go the other way. This is such a big deal. This is such a big deal. So here's what Joseph does. Joseph, in verse 11, now one day he went into the house to do his work because he was a man of integrity. He showed up, whether he loved his job, hated his job, he had a job, so he did it to the best of his ability. He shows up to the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. Uh-oh. And this married chick, this married woman, grabs him by his garment and said, sleep with me. It's got an exclamation point. She was being very forceful, but leaving his garment in her hand. That means she had a hold of him, and he fought away with such ferocity that he escaped and ran outside. Escaped and ran outside. Everyone who has sinned sexually has done so because we flirted instead of fleed. That's how we mess up. That is exactly how we mess up. And for the sake of your integrity, there are things in your life that have to stop. Whether that's stop looking at PORN. And I'll tell you, earlier I said those things that we need to put a nasty gram on, and those things that we need to deflate the power. One of the commentators I heard recently started, instead of saying the word, started spelling it, because he realized that word had so much power, especially with people who are struggling with it. So I will take away the power of that. And so whether it's stop watching things you shouldn't be watching, or if it's stop having lunch with a coworker of the opposite sex, it's not okay. Something has to stop, because I'm telling you that you're probably on the edge of that platform. You don't have a safety harness, and right now you're too dumb to notice. It's time to flee. It's time to flee. And here's the thing. You might believe in Jesus. You might even say, I trust him with my heart. But are you trusting him with these kinds of decisions? We've talked about this so many times. Back in the day, the Crusaders, when they would be baptized and they'd get dunked, it was awesome. But here's what they did wrong. What they would do is they would hold their sword up, and they would hold it out of the water. And as they were dunked and that sword is still up, what they would essentially say is, I'm giving myself to God, except this part. I'm in charge of this part. Is that you? Is there a part of your life, whether it be your sex life, your mouth, your eating habits, your job, your pursuit of greatness? Is there a part of you that you're saying, nah, I'm in charge of this. Can't quite give that to God yet, because I won't get where I want to go. Because there's no such thing as partial lordship. That's the dirty truth. Me too. So do you say that you believe Jesus in the songs, but when it comes to that certain area of your life, you go, no, not quite. Friends, we got to be real. We have to be honest. Now, here's what stinks. Joseph did the right thing, and now it just goes bad. It goes really bad. And Potiphar gets home, and his wife actually says, Joseph tried to rape me. No, he didn't. He did the right thing. He fled. And now he goes to prison. And so let me just tell you, some of you will actually walk out of here, and you might actually have the gumption, the internal faith, the integrity to make some better decisions. And then you're going to think, okay, God, I thought if I did this good thing, if I cleaned my act up, you'd hook me up. Well, let me say the point isn't about God being fair to you. The point is about integrity, about having integrity. The point is that that the way we act, the way we talk should line up with what we believe, without question. That's integrity. And so Potiphar, it says he was furious and had him thrown into prison where the king's prisoners were confined. And so Joseph, they're in this prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison guards. And again, I'd be like, instead of giving me favor in prison, how about do me a favor and keep me out of prison? I did the right thing, God. That's not what Joseph says. Man, I want to have this type of integrity and this type of faith. I'm not going to stop trying until I do. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him. And the Lord made everything that he did successful, even in prison. Now, in the interest of time, what we're going to do is we're going to skip over to chapter 41. And so while Joseph's in prison, he meets these two guys that used to work for the king, and they're describing these crazy dreams that they had. And Joseph's like, hey, God's given me a gift. He gave me the ability to interpret dreams. And so this is big. And so the first guy basically describes this dream to Joseph. And Joseph says, okay, you know what this means? This means in 3 days, you're going to be released from prison. You're going to be forgiven. And you're going to be reestablished in your old job. Good for you. That's awesome. And then the other guy's kind of excited. He says, okay, here's my dream. But Joseph says, uh-oh, not good. What that meant is they're actually going to take you out. They're going to hang you. And your head is going to pop off. Sorry? And then Joseph goes back to the first guy and he says, so when you're back, I need you to do me a solid. When you go back to work for Pharaoh, please remember me. You're going to have a chance to say something on my behalf. Please remember me. And so we pick up in chapter 41 at the end of the 2 years, which means Joseph, for doing the right thing, sat in prison for 2 years. 2 years. Does that resonate with anyone? So at the end of 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside the Nile when 7 healthy-looking, well-fed cows came up from the Nile and began to graze among the reeds. And after them, 7 other cows, sickly and thin, came up from the Nile and stood beside those cows along the bank of the Nile. Then the sickly, thin cows ate the healthy, well-fed cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. And so faced Pharaoh's describing this dream to his staff, asking what they thought it meant. And this guy that was in prison with Joseph says, oh yeah, wait, when I was in prison, my cellie, a guy named Joe, he could interpret dreams. And so Pharaoh summons Joe. And so we'll get to verse 14. He shaved, changed his clothes. This is Joseph, kind of getting himself ready for this job interview. And he went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it. Now watch this. Watch this now. He's in prison. Like he's out on leave technically at this point. The Pharaoh summoned him. He hadn't actually been released from prison yet. So he's still imprisoned. And even though this is the most desperate time he's ever been in, he is not willing to do or say things that make him look good. Instead, he has this guttural response of an integrity to give God the glory. How many of us can learn a lesson there? Stop telling everybody how great you are at whatever it is you do. Oh, you're the best. Are you really? Or did God give you those abilities? Integrity mixed with some humility This is the most desperate time ever. He's not willing to take all the credit, and he says, I am not able to. Which we think, well, that's kind of a lie, right? Because he can. No, this is what he means. Joseph answered the Pharaoh, I'm not able to. It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. In other words, God does this through me. I'm not that awesome. Now, this is a big deal because at that time, by the way, Pharaoh thought he was God. And so Joseph is essentially saying, my God is bigger than you. That's a dangerous thing to say to the guy, the kind of ruler of the world. And so everyone who's in the room listening probably thought, this dude's a dead man. Joe, nice knowing you. And this is what he says. He says, here's what your dream meant. The big fat cows represent the next 7 years in Egypt. Plenty of food, economy booming. Got the right people in office, apparently. Go, Brandon. Anyway, and those skinny cows will represent the following 7 years of famine. So not that you asked, but here's what I would do if I were you. For the next 7 years, stock up enough food to cover the following 7 years. And here's what Pharaoh basically says. He says, great idea, Joe. You're in charge of it. He didn't pontificate on how great he was, and he put God first, gave all the glory and honor to God, and yet God, and right there, God once again gives him favor in this moment. Gives him favor. And so Pharaoh, in verse 39, said to Joseph, since God made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you are. You'll be over my house and over all of my people. All of my people will obey your commands. Only I, as king, will be greater than you. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I'm placing you over all the land of Egypt. So what about you? Have you fallen into a habit of self-promoting yourself at work or wherever? Taking credit for the gifts and the talents that God has blessed you with? Telling everyone how awesome you is? I want to be like Joseph. That's not what he did. He simply pointed to God. So here's the deal. The point isn't about sexual immorality. The point isn't about approval of others. The point is not about power and seeking it. The real point is not about power and seeking it. The real point is that you have trusted Jesus with your heart. Because some of us say we have trusted Jesus with our heart, but we're not trusting him with our lives. I mean, you might be singing a song and saying all the words, raising your hands, praying with your eyes closed. Oh, yes, Jesus. But are you trusting him with the way you're living? Because that's what's important. Do you trust him with your job? With your work? Are you trusting him with your friendships? Are you trusting him with the relationships you have? And mind you, it is not simply trusting him with those relationships, trusting him with those friendships, trusting him with your work, but bringing him into those things and doing what he says we should do in those areas. Are you walking in such a way that demonstrates to everyone around who can see you that you trust him and that Jesus is your Lord? Because here's what Joe did. Here's what Joe did. If we skip to Genesis 50, essentially the famine comes, and those same brothers that beat him and sold him into slavery, they show up in Egypt hungry because famine reached their land. And he's going to be there. We're going to talk about this next week, standing over them, and he can do whatever he wants to do. Let me ask, what would you do to the people that beat you? Family that beat you, sold you, they didn't have your back, not the way you think they should have. What would you do? Well, we're going to talk about that next week, but here's just a little sneak peek. In chapter 50, verse 19, his brothers are kneeling down thinking, uh-oh, this guy's going to kill us. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. So Joseph basically says, listen up, boys. Regardless of the situations, regardless of your choices, regardless of those circumstances, regardless of the fact that I was in prison, regardless of the fact that I was human trafficked, regardless of I've met my lowest points ever, through all of those things, I clung with a vice grip to this vision God gave me for my life because I trust God. And I mean, very practically speaking, what about you? What would you have to change this week to demonstrate with your actions, with the way you communicate, that you actually believe in Jesus? Whether it's your friends, your family, your coworkers, heaven forbid, your employees. What would have to change in your life? Not to just be so powerful, not just to be so smart and wise, but to actually treat people the way Jesus said to treat them. What would have to change so it looked like this is what you believe? You see, Hebrews says it this way. In 11, verse 6, now without faith, it is impossible to please God. And that's huge. But then we back it up with James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? This is not works that saves you, but what this is saying, what good is it to, with your mouth, with your lip service, with your gums flapping, say that you believe all these things, but have nothing to show for it? In other words, nobody believes it. In other words, you cannot act your way into faith, but the way you act reveals if you actually have faith. Are you tracking? And again, you could say ouch or amen. That choice is yours. I've had to say ouch a lot of times in my life, and that's what led me to stronger faith, stronger integrity. Now, this is important. This is not a try harder sermon. This is a quit trying so hard and just surrender to Jesus, trust Jesus sermon. That's how we're going to bear more fruit, friends. This is not an attack. This is a lifeline. A friend of mine sent me something a couple weeks ago, and he said, why is it that that there's apparently a staircase to heaven, a stairway to heaven, but a highway to hell? Because those are the odds. Those are the choices so many are going to make, deceiving themselves. So what do we have to change? We need to lean into Jesus more and more and more. Let His glory, let His grace, let His gospel shine bright into our lives, and let His light push out that darkness. Would you stand and pray with me?